Hello, everyone. Welcome to Talking Logistics, where we have conversations with thought leaders and newsmakers in the supply chain logistics industry. And today it's just going to be me and all of you joining us today, talking about important factors to consider when evaluating and selecting 3PL partners. Now, this is a topic that I get asked a lot about over the years. And in fact, just last week, I received an email from someone asking if I had updated some work that I had done a few years ago, where I had put together a model and a set of evaluation factors for companies to consider when looking at 3PLs and for 3PLs to use in terms of benchmarking themselves, against their peers. And the fact is, I haven't really done an update of that work since that. But that got the wheels turning in my head, and in fact, that's what really inspired the reason to doing today's episode. I figured this would be a good way to kind of get the conversation started and be able to get your ideas and thoughts on this topic as well. So one of the goals that we have here with Talking Logistics is to really make this conversational and involve you, the audience, as part of the discussion. So, as I go along here sharing my thoughts on this topic, if you've got any, questions or comments, you can share that via the chat feature or also via the submit a question button. And I'll keep an eye on it and try to weave those into the conversation as best I can. Um, one of the things that I've noticed over the years, as I've done research in this area and done think tanks with supply chain executives on, outsourcing and understanding their 3PL relationships, is that some companies, some folks approach the, you know, the finding and evaluating of a 3PL partner the same way that they kind of approach buying supply chain software or any other product, right? They have their list of, features and functions that they go through, right? Does the 3PL have refrigerated trucks? Do they have, warehouses in these states or in these geographic regions? And, bullet item, bullet item, bullet item, bullet item. And, the reality is, I think as we can all kind of, if we take a step back, appreciate and understand is that, there's a difference between, buying a product, like a piece of software or a camera or a laptop, and, looking to engage in what will hopefully be, a long-term relationship with a business partner. And I think if you think back to when you were dating, and maybe as you were looking for a significant other, you might have had a set of features and functions yourself in terms of what that ideal partner would be, right? Tall, short, blonde, brunette, blue eyes, brown eyes, lawyer, doctor, musician, artist, so on and so forth. But the reality is, and we all know that those things might be important in terms of the initial attraction, in terms of getting to the first date and kind of the initial interaction. But those things become less important, and it's not really what makes for a successful long-term relationship. And the same is true for finding a 3PL partner that you can have a successful and long-term relationship with. There are many, factors, that I would consider basic factors in evaluating selecting a 3PL. Certainly too many to discuss here today. Certainly things like, does the 3PL provide the service that I'm looking for? That may sound like a very basic and simple question, but I can't tell you how many times I've spoken with sales executives at 3PLs where they said, we sometimes get RFPs from prospective customers for services that we don't even provide or we're not even a good fit for. And it's obvious to them that all this prospective customer did was they went to some magazine that lists top 25 3PLs, and basically just blasted out the RFP to everyone on that list without doing some upfront homework. So I mean, I think it's basic common sense, but you really have to do some upfront homework to at least narrow down the field a little bit in terms of who would be appropriate partners to at least begin the evaluation process with. Whether you do that initial research yourself or you hire a consultant to do that. I mean, I think it's obvious, so it's important that that gets done. Certainly, looking at the whether a service provider has experience in your vertical industry, or in your specific geographic region is also important. Financial stability. Is the service provider, making money? Are they profitable? Are they growing? Um, are they private? Who are their investors? Any have they been laying off people? Any churn on their management level? Those are all things that I think are part of any due diligence. I would call those basic factors to look at. What I really want to focus on today are on factors that go beyond those basic ones. And kind of the approach that I took was to kind of take a step back, and I went back to some research that I did a few years back, and I figured it would be interesting to kind of look at those areas where customers have the greatest disappointment in terms of their relationship with the 3PLs. Those areas where 3PLs have fallen short of expectations. And there are two areas that kind of jump out. Um, by far, uh, the number one reason or the number one area that customers of 3PLs get disappointed in is they say that the 3PLs are not proactive enough in identifying continuous improvement opportunities. And if you look at the data, this is by far the biggest reason, greatly outweighing any of the other reasons. And another top area of disappointment is that 3PLs are, again, from the eyes of the customers, uh, they view them as being slow to respond to process changes or other requests that they have, right? So the customer supply chain is changing quickly. They're looking for the 3PL to be able to enable a new process or make some process change, and the 3PL just can't, keep up or be able to respond as quickly as the customer wants them to. So I kind of looked at those, key factors, those key areas of disappointment. I said, what can companies do upfront as they're evaluating 3PLs to, minimize the risk or eliminate, the possibility for those disappointments to come up. So I'm going to focus on those factors today, and I've got four of them that I want to talk about. The first one is alignment of continuous improvement cultures. Um, I've had the opportunity to, look at a lot of 3PL customer relationships, and those that have been the most successful, the most long term, all have a common, thread between them all. Both the 3PL and the customer had a very strong culture of continuous improvement, and in many cases, it was a lean Six Sigma culture. And this makes a lot of sense. I mean, right off the bat, you both are speaking a common language, right? There is an immediate bond there in terms of what's important to both companies. Um, I kind of equate it to kind of meeting someone for the first time and realizing that you both went to the same university, right? And immediately already there's kind of a connection point there that you can build a relationship on. And it's the same thing here, and obviously more importantly here when it comes to continuous improvement. So again, when you look at that, the number one area that customers are disappointed on in terms of continuous improvement, having alignment in culture um, that really prioritizes and invests in continuous improvement is a critical component. So, when you visit a prospective 3PL, I mean, that's certainly one of the things to look for, is to look around and see um, and look for evidence of how well entrenched, continuous improvement is within their culture, within their operations, within their people. I remember taking a tour of a 3PL 2 or 3 years ago, and the facility was impressive. Um, the type of work they were doing was impressive. But what really impressed me the most was walking to each of the stations and having the frontline folks talk to me about some of the more recent continuous improvement projects that they helped to identify and that they helped to lead. And they were really using the language of Six Sigma and Lean and talking about Kaizen and eliminating waste. And they were so proud of the work and the contribution that they made in those areas. And when you looked around at some of the material up on the walls, and just the overall impression that I walked away with there was that it was obvious that this was an organization where lean and continuous improvement was really embedded within their culture. And I think that's something to look for, as you're evaluating a third-party logistics provider. How many projects, continuous projects per year do they do? Do they have a formalized, training program around this? How many black belts do they have? Um, any kind of awards have they received from customers, related to continuous improvement? These are all little things that you can look for that kind of, speaks to this point. I think at the end of the day, if continuous improvement isn't part of the 3PL's, DNA, then I think you're setting yourself up for some potential disappointment down the road. And and frankly, the same applies in reverse, right? So if you, as the prospective customer, if continuous improvement, Lean Six Sigma is really not part of your culture, um, and you're trying to work with someone, 3PL that is part of their culture. Again, that misalignment can lead to problems, particularly for the 3PL. And I think many smart 3PLs, when they see that, misalignment there, are turning away work because they know that um, they might be getting themselves in a situation where that customer may not value their input, value some of the things that they're trying to enable as part of that relationship. So again, continuous improvement, alignment and continuous improvement is one of those factors that I think is arguably one of the most critical ones to the success of a long-term relationship. Moving on to the second factor here is modern IT platform and being innovation focused. So, I talked about one of the key disappointments that customers have with the 3PLs is not being, 3PLs not being able to respond quickly to their process changes. And I would say that in most of the cases, the root cause as to why 3PLs can't respond quickly is because they have very rigid and outdated IT systems. Um, it's certainly when I was speaking to 3PLs, many years ago, for them to make any kind of change to their IT system, sometimes required months of work, customization to their system, a ton of people and time. And obviously in today's environment where supply chain processes is so much more dynamic, where the requirements are continuously changing, customers can't afford to wait months, to get a new process enabled, some change enabled in terms of how their supply chains operate. And quite frankly, 3PLs can't afford it either because that's becoming a critical factor here. Um, so, as you're looking at the IT investments, IT platform of a 3PL, I mean, quickly take a look at it. I mean, are most of those systems, were they developed in the 90s, using, outdated languages that are really not used anymore? Or are they built more and more common and more modern and open architectures of, today's systems? I think if it's more of the former, if there's a lot of legacy, outdated systems out there, that's going to create a lot of challenges, particularly from an integration standpoint. Number one, in terms of being able to integrate with your IT systems and be able to get that timely flow of information flowing between both companies, and it may arise in some data quality issues. But secondly, it's going to hinder that 3PL from being able to make process changes quickly in support of your needs. So really understanding how modern their technology platform is, I think is critically important. The other piece is, understanding, how much the 3PL invests in technology. What percent of their net revenues do they invest in IT? Um, but even beyond that, because sometimes the raw dollar amount could be deceiving because the reality is that, a lot of 3PLs might spend a lot of money on IT, but it's mostly on maintaining their old legacy systems, right? It's just to keep the lights on, if you will. What you really want to know is how much of their IT investments are going towards innovation related investments, right? In enabling new capabilities, in implementing new systems, and so on and so forth. So you really want to get a sense of, how much of that IT budget and resources that a 3PL has, how much of that is focused on innovation versus just keeping the lights on and maintaining some of their old systems. And lastly here, you really want to have a good discussion with the CIO at the 3PL or the main IT team there to really understand their IT roadmap and strategy, and how it aligns with yours, right? You want to make sure that what the 3PL is investing in, the type of tools, the technology, align with your expectations, align with what you're investing in internally, and more importantly, are going to help enable some of the capabilities that not only you need today, but you may need from them down the road. So again, I talked about alignment of continuous improvement cultures. I think here alignment of IT strategy and vision and priorities is also important. So that's the second point. I want to move on now to the third point, and it is investment in talent development and retention. This is something I've written about in the blog, where there is a talent shortage in the industry, and it is the top concern or challenge that 3PL CEOs face. As reported by a study done by Northeastern University. Um, and again, at the end of the day, I talked about 3PL customer, this being a relationship. At the end of the day, relationships are built and managed and developed by people, right? It's the people to people interactions that make for a successful 3PL relationship. And in fact, one of the other areas that I hear a lot about from shippers in terms of what happens sometimes that could create some challenges in the relationship is things might be going, well with the relationship, and the customer may have a wonderful relationship with the person at the 3PL side who's managing their account, and then that person gets, moved to another account or moves to some other part of the 3PL, or that person leaves the company, leaves the 3PL, and now someone new is brought in to manage their relationship, and sometimes that could create some difficulties there. And again, I think that underscores the importance of people and the role that they play in managing the relationship. So really what you want to look for is, the type of people, type of talent that the 3PL has. Do they have folks in there that have experience and expertise in my vertical industry, right? Have they been in my shoes? Right? Do they understand the drivers, the cost drivers, the service drivers, the trends that are going on in my particular industry? You want to have a 3PL that has, folks again that can speak your language, has been in your shoes, and can, again, be able to uh, uh, relate to you from that perspective, from firsthand experience. You want to get a sense of what kind of investment is a 3PL making in training and development programs, and what are the specifics of those programs? What are they training their people in? Talk about Lean Six Sigma. Is that part of their curriculum and part of what they're training their people on? Are they being trained on some of the technology on analytics, so on and so forth? So again, you want to get a sense of what are some of the training and skills that the 3PL is making available to their people, because ultimately those are the you want those folks to, again, to contribute to your business and contribute to the way they're managing uh, your supply operations on your behalf. Um, Going back to the point that I mentioned earlier, one of the uh, areas that I think is also important is to understand how a 3PO would manage a transition of an employee. Um, while it's understandable why a customer might be upset or look down upon kind of having someone that they've built a close relationship with kind of get moved into another role. But from a 3PL perspective, obviously they want to provide a career path for their employees. They want to expose their employees to a variety of different roles and responsibilities with their company. So um, that should be an opportunity. You shouldn't limit a 3PL from the ability to move people around. But at the same time, one of the best practices I've seen there is getting the customer involved, you as the customer involved in that transition process, right? In terms of helping to train, perhaps have some overlap of period where the new person is working side by side with the existing person, so that when the transition takes place, you as the customer feel comfortable with with this person understanding your company, understanding your priorities, understanding how your supply chain works, so that that results in a smooth transition. So understanding that transition process and what role the customer can play in that, I think, is also important. And finally, the last point that I want to talk about, and again, before I get into it, I just want to remind you all that if you've got some thoughts or questions on any of this, or you have your own thoughts, you can submit them via the chat feature or ask the question button. Um, but let me get to the fourth piece now, and that is the ability to deliver business intelligence and insights. Now, this goes beyond IT, beyond being able to provide you with a dashboard with pie charts and bar graphs, letting you know how you're doing on cost and service and things like that. I mean, that's a given. That's important. I think business intelligence and analytics and dashboards and reports, are certainly part of what I would consider these days almost basic factors that you have to look at. What I'm talking about here really gets to back to the point of the biggest disappointment that customers have with their 3PLs in terms of not being proactive enough in identifying continuous improvement opportunities. What I hear a lot from customers is, I guess to put it in simple terms, what they're really saying is, tell me, 3PL, something that I don't already know, right? Provide me with some insights, some business intelligence that will make me smarter, are things that I don't know about that I should be thinking about to help me manage my supply chain and make smarter decisions faster, right? So, what they're looking for from the 3PLs is for the 3PL to provide their perspective on some of the, emerging trends that are happening out there, right? So what's happening on what's the 3PL's perspective on what's happening with fuel, what's happening with capacity, what's happening with some of the regulations that are out there, and more importantly, not don't just provide me with your perspective. Tell me what are some of the things I should be thinking about, some of the actions I should be considering in response to those trends, right? So, I mean, that's one key area that I think customers are looking for from the 3PLs. One of the things I've talked about in the blog is that 3PLs today are much more than operations managers, right? A 3PL today is an operations manager plus a technology provider plus a consultant, right? And really, it's that consultant piece that they're looking for 3PLs to bring to the table, right? To be able to provide those insights, be able to tell you, the customer, things that they don't already know. And doing that and communicating that in a regular and formalized manner, whether it's via, conference calls, webcasts, blog postings, newsletters, conference calls. Again, having some defined program there where it's not just an ad hoc, thing, but that the 3PL really has a formalized way of really sharing those insights and that business intelligence with their customers. And then related to that is, and related to the previous point around talent, is making, having the ability to tap into the talent pool that the 3PL has. Um, I was at a customer advisory board meeting a couple of years ago at a 3PL where they brought in a number of their customers together. And one of the things that one of the customers said was, "Wow, all I knew, um, uh, the only person I really knew at the 3PL was my account manager, right? I had no idea that um, the 3PL that I'm working with had all these other people that had expertise in all these different areas, whether there was in global trade, whether it was in e-commerce, whether it was with government regulations. They had no visibility that all these other resources were there. And really what they wanted was the ability to be able to access that talent if they had questions in some of these areas. So again, I think, this is an opportunity for 3PLs to differentiate themselves in terms of making, if you're already making investments in developing your talent, make that talent available in an easy way, to your customers, whether it's being able to, call them, being able to, again, access them or showcase them via, blog postings or conference calls, webcasts, so on and so forth. So again, make your talent available to the to your customers. And again, for customers that are evaluating 3PLs, is really seeing that possibility exists. One of the areas that I've also written about related to this topic that I think is an opportunity for 3PLs, and unfortunately not many 3PLs do it yet, is what I call customer engagement management. One of the things that you see in the software industry that's very common is user conferences. You don't see that very much in 3PLs. Where 3PLs bring together, their customers, for their customers to learn from one another, network with one another, and for them to be able to, again, showcase their thought leadership, be able to communicate to their customers, their perspective on what's happening in the industry, and provide their recommendations and advice. Um, so I think that's another thing to look for. Does the 3PL provide, how much customer engagement management do they do? Do they get their customers together? Do they put on events for us to participate in beyond the quarterly business reviews and kind of the nuts and bolts of making sure that our operations are moving forward as planned? This is really more about sessions that are geared more around providing that business intelligence, providing that networking opportunity, not only between the 3PL and you as a customer, but for enabling peer-to-peer learning and interaction with one another. And again, I think this is another area where 3PLs can use social media, whether it's private discussion groups or things of that nature, to facilitate that. So again, those were my four factors that go beyond the basic ones in terms of evaluating and selecting a 3PL provider. Certainly I'm going to continue to do some more thinking on this topic and try to refine some of this. I'll probably write some of these thoughts down in a future blog posting. But anyway, we didn't get any questions today or thoughts. But if you have any that come up in the coming days, feel free to post a comment or a question on the website, and I'll take a look at it. And again, like I mentioned at the onset, the wheels are starting to turn in my head when it comes to this topic, and it's something that I'm going to continue to focus on, and probably at some point down the road, I'll hopefully have some more material and perhaps a framework that will help extend this topic and this conversation. So again, I appreciate you joining me today, and like I say every week, go ahead and mark every Thursday at noon on your calendar, to join us here at Talking Logistics. Today it was just me, but in most weeks we're going to have some great guests. You can check out the website for some of the episodes that we've done so far this year. We have some great guests coming up in the weeks ahead. So I certainly, again, appreciate your time today and look forward to seeing you in a future episode of Talking Logistics. Thank you for your time, and have a great day.